The forgotten tablet. It sat unnoticed, heavy with silence, for more than a century. A slab of clay, chipped at the edges, the color of desert dust, an object that seemed destined for obscurity. When first pulled from the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, it was catalogued as nothing more than a relic of a forgotten world. And yet, carved into its surface were lines of wedge-shaped symbols, an ancient script that once carried the voice of kings and scribes. For decades, no one suspected that these faint markings held a secret so profound that, once revealed, it would shake the foundations of human history. The story begins in the early 1900s, in the suffocating heat of southern Iraq. Archaeologist Edgar J. Banks, a man of many trades and even more ambitions, wandered among the broken stones and collapsed walls of Babylonian cities. He was an adventurer in the old sense of the word, part scholar, part treasure hunter, part dealer in antiquities. His flair for danger and dusty discoveries would later inspire the fictional creation of Indiana Jones. But that day, there was no whip, no fanfare, only the relentless sun and the slow work of sifting through the remnants of one of humanity's first civilizations. What Banks found did not glitter. It was not a jewel-encrusted idol or a golden mask. It was instead something plain, almost disappointing, a palm-sized clay tablet, its corners broken, its surface etched with rows of cuneiform. Roughly the size of a paperback book, it seemed unremarkable compared to the more ornate artifacts that collectors craved. Banks himself likely saw it as little more than a curiosity, one of countless tablets documenting rations, debts, or temple offerings. For a few dollars, he sold it to George Arthur Plimpton, a wealthy New York publisher and collector of educational oddities. Plimpton, more interested in preserving the breadth of human learning than in treasure, donated it to Columbia University. There, it received the dry label Plimpton 322, a name that gave no hint of the magnitude of its contents. And so, the little tablet slipped into obscurity. For decades, it rested in quiet drawers, surrounded by thousands of other artifacts. Scholars who glanced at it noticed its neat 4 columns and 15 rows, but most assumed it was some bureaucratic tally of grain, wages, or land allotments. The numbers were too orderly to be random, yet their purpose remained elusive. To generations of researchers, it was just another piece of clay in an endless Babylonian puzzle. And yet, whispers of its strangeness refused to die entirely. In the 1942nd, a handful of historians and mathematicians looked closer and noted peculiarities, patterns that suggested something more than simple record-keeping. Some believed it might relate to right-angled triangles, but with large sections of the tablet missing, the full design lay just out of reach, as though the sands of time had deliberately erased the answer. For the rest of the 20th century, Plimpton 322 was a curiosity for specialists, little more than an academic oddity. But history has a way of lying dormant, waiting for the right moment and the right eyes to awaken it. In the 21st century, as technology reached levels the Babylonians themselves could scarcely have imagined, the silent numbers finally began to stir. A photograph of the tablet, glanced at by an Australian mathematician designing high school curricula, reignited a century-old mystery. The man was Daniel Mansfield, and what he saw on that cracked surface would not let go of him. The layout, the rhythm, the symmetry in the sequences, it whispered of something greater, something purposeful. If the Babylonians had indeed inscribed a hidden code of mathematics onto this clay, then for nearly 3,700 years, humanity had been walking past a message written in plain sight, blind to its meaning. The question was simple but immense. Could this small, broken tablet actually prove that a civilization nearly 4 millennia old possessed mathematical knowledge more precise and in some ways more advanced than our own? The answer would come, not from human intuition alone, but from the mind of a new kind of interpreter, artificial intelligence. And with it, the numbers would finally speak. When AI awoke the numbers, the rediscovery of Plimpton 322 did not begin in a museum or an archive. It began in the quiet office of a mathematician in Sydney, thousands of miles from the Mesopotamian desert. Daniel Mansfield, a researcher at the University of New South Wales, was designing a curriculum for high school mathematics. He needed examples to help teachers explain difficult concepts to their students. Browsing through images of ancient tablets, his eyes caught a photograph of the small, chipped slab labeled Plimpton 322. It should have been just another curiosity, one of many images tucked away in dusty academic catalogs. Yet something about it struck him. The arrangement of numbers was too clean, too symmetrical. The tablet's grid-like precision hinted at purpose, at intention. Mansfield found himself staring at a puzzle that refused to let go. What he was looking at didn't feel like a list of rations or offerings. It felt alive, as if it had been designed to do something. Unable to dismiss his curiosity, Mansfield enlisted the help of a colleague, mathematician Norman Wildberger. Together they asked the question that would change the way scholars viewed the artifact. What if this wasn't a record at all, but a tool? To answer, they needed to peer into the missing sections, the eroded numbers time had devoured. Guesswork would not do. To unlock the full pattern, they would need something capable of detecting structure beyond human patience. They turned to artificial intelligence. Feeding the surviving sequences of Plimpton 322 into machine learning algorithms, Mansfield and Wildberger trained the system on other Babylonian tablets, mathematical texts, problem-solving exercises, and accounting records. The AI analyzed the notations, reconstructed missing digits, and searched for patterns that humans could not fully see. It was as if they had asked a machine to breathe life into clay. Bit by bit, the algorithm filled the gaps. Rows became complete again. Columns regained their lost symmetry. What emerged was no longer a fragmented riddle, but a coherent design, an intact table of astonishing complexity. This was not random scrawling. The numbers lined up with startling deliberateness, like the skeleton of a language waiting to be spoken. The revelation shook even seasoned researchers. Here, in the hands of Babylonian scribes nearly 4 millennia ago, was a system of knowledge that did not simply anticipate later mathematics. It challenged the timeline of its birth. The numbers were not just mathematical. They were precise, elegant, and purposeful, hinting at a science that was not supposed to exist until 1,000 years later. For centuries, the Greeks had been credited as the inventors of trigonometry, the science of triangles and measurement. Pythagoras, born around 570 BCE, had been enshrined in every schoolbook as the first to articulate the famous theorem linking the sides of a right triangle. But the reconstructed tablet suggested something staggering, that the Babylonians had mastered this relationship not centuries, but over a millennium before the Greeks. If true, this changed everything. It meant that long before Athens built its marble temples, long before Greek philosophers carved their names into the intellectual heritage of the West, clay scribes in Mesopotamia were etching into fragile tablets mathematical truths of breathtaking sophistication. And this was no mere academic footnote. The Babylonians had not stumbled upon a coincidence. They had crafted a working tool, a reference system built not for the abstract games of philosophers, but for the very practical demands of life. Surveying land, constructing canals, raising temples from the dust of the earth. The chilling realization was this: Plimpton 322 was not just an ancient artifact. It was a window into an entire way of thinking that modern history had nearly forgotten. And as the AI restored its missing pieces, it revealed a system of mathematics that, in some ways, was more exact, more refined, and more useful than the trigonometry we rely on today. For the first time in nearly 4,000 years, the numbers on the tablet had spoken, and what they had to say was enough to shake the bedrock of history itself: trigonometry. Before the Greeks, for centuries, we have been taught that mathematics has a clear lineage. Egypt gave us monumental geometry, Greece gave us trigonometry, and Rome gave us engineering. In that story, Pythagoras is the father of the right triangle, the first to uncover the relationship between its sides. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Known. But the broken tablet known as Plimpton 322 whispered something far more astonishing. It hinted that the Babylonians had not only grasped this relationship long before Pythagoras was even born, they had transformed it into a working system of breathtaking precision. When Mansfield and Wildberger studied the reconstructed tablet, the numbers arranged themselves into a pattern that was impossible to ignore. These were not arbitrary entries. They were what mathematicians today call Pythagorean triples, sets of three whole numbers that perfectly satisfy the Pythagorean theorem. Line after line, row after row, the clay tablet recorded them with deliberate care. This was not a scribal accident, nor an isolated discovery. It was an ordered sequence, a catalog of right-angled triangles preserved in cuneiform. The implications were staggering. If the Babylonians intentionally compiled such triples, then they were not merely dabbling in arithmetic. They had built a structured mathematical tool, one that predated Greek trigonometry by more than 1,000 years. But the shock did not stop there. When the ratios within the tablet were examined more closely, an even stranger truth emerged. The Babylonians weren't thinking in terms of angles at all. Modern trigonometry, as inherited from the Greeks, relies on sines, cosines, and tangents, functions of angles measured in degrees or radians. But the Babylonians measured pure ratios between sides of triangles. This difference seems subtle, but in practice, it was revolutionary. By avoiding angles altogether, their methods sidestepped approximation errors that plague even modern systems. Irrational numbers, decimals stretching into infinity, and rounding mistakes were of no concern. Their base 60 system allowed them to express ratios with uncanny accuracy, using whole numbers alone. Where Greek trigonometry often relied on estimates, Babylonian trigonometry achieved exactness. Imagine, for a moment, standing in ancient Mesopotamia. You are a surveyor tasked with mapping fields or aligning the foundations of a temple. You have no protractor, no compass, no measuring tools of metal or glass. And yet, with Plimpton 322-inch hand or its knowledge carried in your mind, you can calculate land boundaries, construct right angles, and scale triangles to any size with mathematical certainty. If you know one side and the proportion to another, the rest falls into place with flawless precision. This was not abstract philosophy. It was a technology of survival. The great canals of Babylon had to carry water at precise slopes to irrigate fields without flooding them. Temples had to be aligned with the heavens and built with exacting geometry to stand the test of time. Fields had to be divided fairly to prevent disputes between neighbors. In each case, Babylonian trigonometry offered something that even modern methods sometimes struggle to achieve: perfect ratios, scaled to reality without error. What makes this even more extraordinary is the sense of intentional design. The Babylonians weren't stumbling upon occasional solutions, they were organizing knowledge into a structured, repeatable system. In some ways, it was mathematics stripped to its most essential, practical core: geometry without the baggage of approximation, trigonometry without the lens of angles. And so, a chilling possibility began to emerge. If this was true, if the Babylonians had indeed developed a form of trigonometry centuries before Greece, then much of what we believe about the origins of mathematics is not just incomplete, but fundamentally flawed. Civilization's intellectual ladder, carefully arranged in textbooks, suddenly looked less like a steady climb and more like a shattered staircase. But there was another question, one that unsettled even the most cautious scholars. Why? Advanced mathematics like this does not appear out of thin air. It is not invented for amusement or kept for curiosity. It is created to solve problems, real, pressing problems. Which meant that if the Babylonians had mastered this knowledge, then somewhere, somehow, they must have put it to use. And the proof of that application would come from another clay tablet, one even more startling than Plimpton 322. Blueprints of Power, Psi, 0.427, and Land Control. If Plimpton 322 was the formula book, then another artifact, discovered centuries after it was first inscribed, was the field manual. The proof that mathematics was not merely an abstract curiosity, but a living instrument of authority. That artifact was C.427, a clay tablet dating back 3,000, 700 years, etched not with columns of numbers but with something startlingly familiar to modern eyes, a map. At first glance, C.427 resembles a crude sketch lines, angles, and annotations scored into clay. But closer inspection reveals its purpose. It is not a piece of art, nor a scribal exercise. It is a surveyor's map, created to resolve a land dispute. The lines are straight, the corners precise, the divisions carefully measured. Here was geometry not as a theory, but as a tool of law. This was mathematics in its most human context. Property. The people of Mesopotamia lived in a world where survival depended on fertile fields and flowing water. Land meant life, inheritance, and power. Disputes over boundaries were inevitable, and those disputes could escalate into violence if not resolved. But with tablets like Sci.427, disputes could be settled with certainty. The clay did not merely record agreements, it defined them. When modern researchers examined the tablet, they were struck by its precision. The surveyor who created it clearly understood right angles, proportions, and geometric relationships. This was not guesswork. It was the application of the very same mathematical principles recorded in Plimpton 322. Together, the two tablets form a haunting partnership. One provides the theoretical ratios of triangles, the other shows those ratios in practice, inscribed on the earth itself. Daniel Mansfield, who helped unlock the secrets of Plimpton 322, argued that this was no coincidence. The scribes and surveyors of Babylon likely carried such knowledge with them into the fields, into the courts, and into the very machinery of governance. The numbers of one tablet found their expression in the boundaries of farms and the allocation of water. And here is where the story takes a darker turn. Mathematics, in Babylon, was not simply a science, it was a structure of power. Whoever controlled the numbers could control the land. They could assign ownership, determine fairness, and regulate access to the very resources that sustained life. In a society where droughts could starve thousands and fertile land meant prosperity, the authority to measure, to divide, and to mark was nothing short of dominion. Think of how unsettlingly modern this sounds. Today, we use cadastral maps, GPS coordinates, and legal deeds to establish property lines. In ancient Babylon, they were already doing something strikingly similar. Thousands of years earlier, using only clay and the base 60 system of their mathematics. The precision of their methods ensured that decisions carried weight not just practical, but legal. A farmer could point to a tablet and say, "This is mine, the mathematics proves it." But this precision had consequences. By turning mathematics into an arbiter of ownership, Babylonian rulers could bind society together or control it. Fields were not merely planted, they were sanctioned. Canals did not merely flow, they were engineered under the eye of law. In a sense, Babylon had invented a system where authority was etched into clay and legitimized by numbers. The unsettling realization is this: mathematics, long celebrated as humanity's purest pursuit of truth, was here revealed as a tool of governance, even control. The scribes were not just mathematicians, they were instruments of order, agents of the state. The calculations carved into Plimpton 322 and applied in C.427 did more than measure, they shaped the very framework of civilization. And yet, as remarkable as these two surviving tablets are, they raise a question more haunting than any they answer. If these fragments of knowledge survived only by chance, what greater system once surrounded them? How much of Babylon's mathematical world has been lost to time, and how much power lay hidden in numbers we no longer possess? Silent archives and the AI revolution. For every tablet like Plimpton 322 or C.427 that rises from obscurity to transform our understanding of history, there are thousands more that remain silent. In museums, universities, and storerooms across the world, clay tablets lie stacked in drawers and boxes, unassuming, cracked, half-erased, and largely forgotten. Some were excavated a century ago, tagged, and left untouched ever since. Others remain unpublished, barely studied, their contents still locked inside wedge-shaped cuneiform marks. The scale is staggering. Tens of thousands of tablets from Mesopotamia alone sit waiting. Many are administrative records, but woven among them are texts that no one has yet translated. Mathematical problems, astronomical charts, medical treatises, even legal disputes frozen in clay. Each one has the potential to rewrite what we think we know about the world's first great civilizations. And yet, most remain voiceless because of a simple problem. Cuneiform is hard. It is one of the oldest writing systems on Earth, and also one of the most complex. To read it requires years of study, mastery of hundreds of symbols, and an understanding of dialects that shifted over centuries. Even then, the tablets themselves resist easy answers. Some are damaged beyond repair, some written in cramped, idiosyncratic hands, others obscured by time. A single scholar might spend months painstakingly deciphering one fragment, inching through lines of clay that once took a scribe only hours to impress. The pace of scholarship simply cannot match the vastness of the archives. But in the 21st century, a new kind of scribe has emerged, one not of clay and stylus, but of code and circuits. Artificial intelligence, trained on thousands of examples of cuneiform, is now capable of reading, translating, and even reconstructing tablets at a scale and speed no human could ever achieve. In recent years, machine learning models have reached astonishing accuracy, transcribing legal texts with near perfection, identifying damaged symbols with confidence, and filling in missing portions of text by recognizing patterns invisible to the human eye. Imagine what this means. A single scholar might labor for years to decode a handful of tablets, but AI can process hundreds, even thousands, in the same span of time. It can sort them by topic, date, or mathematical pattern, instantly directing human researchers to the most promising discoveries. What might have taken generations could soon happen in a matter of months. And here lies the haunting thought. If Plimpton 322, one of the most extraordinary mathematical artifacts ever found, sat in plain sight at Columbia University for nearly a century before its significance was grasped, then what other treasures are still hiding among the silent archives? What other works of brilliance are gathering dust, dismissed as routine until the right eye or the right algorithm recognizes them? Could there be other trigonometric tables, more complete and more detailed than Plimpton 322? Could there be engineering manuals that reveal construction techniques we thought impossible for their time? Could there be star charts that show a level of astronomical precision centuries ahead of what we credit? Each unanswered tablet is a locked door, and AI is the key that could open them all at once. But with this key comes something unsettling. For centuries, history has been curated through human interpretation. Scholars shaped narratives. Greece as the cradle of geometry, Rome as the master of engineering, the Enlightenment as the dawn of reason. Anything that did not fit neatly into this story was often ignored or explained away. AI, by contrast, is indifferent. It does not care whether the results fit into our cherished timelines. It sees patterns where they exist, connections where humans never thought to look. This is both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because it may uncover truths about the ancient world that we could never have reached on our own. Terrifying because it may shatter the comforting narratives we have built around history. It may reveal not a steady march of progress, but a chaotic landscape of knowledge. Peaks of brilliance lost to collapse, valleys of ignorance, where entire sciences were forgotten. And so, as AI begins to awaken the silent archives of Babylon, we find ourselves on the threshold of something extraordinary. We may finally learn what was once known, what was once possible, and what has been lost. But with every discovery comes a deeper, more unsettling question. If the Babylonians could achieve so much, what else did they know that we no longer remember? Rethinking history, the lost peaks of knowledge. History, as it is usually told, feels neat and orderly. We are taught of a ladder of progress. Egypt raised monuments, Greece discovered geometry and philosophy, Rome engineered empires, and centuries later the Enlightenment ushered in modern science. Each civilization building upon the last, a steady march toward our present age of reason and technology. It is a comforting story, a narrative of inevitable ascent, but Plimpton 322 disrupts that illusion. This cracked tablet, born from the mud of Mesopotamia, suggests something far more complicated: that knowledge does not always climb in a straight line. Sometimes it leaps forward, only to vanish into silence. Sometimes entire summits of brilliance are reached, only to crumble into dust, leaving behind fragments we mistake for trivial relics. If the Babylonians were using advanced trigonometry more than 1,000 years before the Greeks, then our timeline of discovery is not a ladder, but a landscape: peaks of innovation rising and falling, valleys of forgotten knowledge stretching between them. Plimpton 322 is not just a mathematical tool, it is a shard of a mountain we did not know existed. And the unsettling truth is that most of that mountain may be gone forever. We know this pattern well. The Library of Alexandria burned, taking with it untold volumes of science, philosophy, and history. The Mayan codices, rich with astronomical knowledge, were destroyed by conquest. Countless works in countless cultures have rotted away, lost to time, war, or deliberate erasure. If Babylonian trigonometry could disappear for nearly 4,000 years, what else might have been lost? Medicines that could have saved lives? Engineering methods that could have reshaped cities? Entire branches of mathematics we have yet to rediscover? This realization is humbling, even unsettling. We often imagine that our present knowledge is permanent, safeguarded by libraries, universities, and digital archives. But history whispers otherwise. Knowledge is fragile. It can vanish in the flames of war, in the silence of neglect, in the passing of a single generation that forgets to teach what it once knew. The Babylonians remind us that brilliance is not bound to modernity. Genius can bloom anywhere, in any age, only to vanish just as quickly. And yet, there is also something profoundly human in this story. The Babylonians did not build spacecraft or wield electricity, but they looked at the world around them and sought patterns. They measured the land, the water, the sky, and in doing so, they captured truths that resonate even now. They remind us that intelligence is not linear, not reserved for the future. It is timeless. Artificial intelligence may help us recover fragments of what has been lost, translating tablets that no human hand has touched in centuries. But as it does, it forces us to confront a question larger than history itself. How much of humanity's greatest potential lies not in the future, but buried in its forgotten past? If a broken clay tablet, dismissed as a dull relic, can overturn centuries of assumptions about mathematics, then what else lies hidden in the silent archives of the world? What other secrets are waiting, ignored, overlooked, mistaken for trivialities, until someone or something asks the right question? The numbers on Plimpton 322 spoke after nearly 4 millennia of silence. They told us that knowledge is fragile, history is incomplete, and genius can be lost as easily as it is found. But they also told us something else: that human potential is vast, unpredictable, and far older than we dare to imagine. And so, as we hold this cracked clay tablet in our hands, we are confronted not only with Babylon's brilliance, but with our own uncertainty. For if the ancients could reach such heights, and if those heights could vanish for thousands of years, then perhaps the true story of humanity is not one of steady progress, but of forgotten summits waiting to be rediscovered. A single fragment of clay has shaken our certainty. Imagine what else still lies buried.